Welcome to Love Your Life After Divorce, the podcast where you'll learn everything you need to know to rebuild your life after divorce from the inside out. Let's dive in. Hey there, I'm so excited you're joining me today. What we're going to talk about is one of my favorite topics because it has truly changed my life. So I cannot wait to share it with you. During the last episode, I explained the difference between clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain is the grief and the loss and the sadness and the anger that we feel as we're recovering from something like a divorce. Dirty pain, on the other hand, is suffering that we add to ourselves that is unnecessary, that we don't have to go through. And so I explained the difference in those. And today I want to share with you how to go about getting yourself out of that dirty pain or of unnecessary suffering. Now, this can apply to any situation where you are judging yourself, judging someone else, judging the circumstance, just in that space where it's really an unnecessary place to be. And you're able to get yourself out of it by what I'm going to tell you today, which is managing your mind. So, managing your mind in a nutshell, I think in the most succinct way possible, just means being aware of what you're thinking and choosing what to think on purpose. That sounds simple, but it's actually not as easy as it sounds because we have about 60,000 thoughts a day running through our minds. And most of us are not aware of most of the thoughts we're having. So, this practice of managing your mind really takes being intentional and doing the work in order to learn how to manage your mind. So, that's what I want to explain to you today. The very first step in managing your mind is becoming aware of what you're thinking. Like I said, we have thousands of thoughts every single day, and so many of them just fly under the radar. We're truly not aware we're having them. In this first step of becoming aware, there are three main ways we can do this. The first way is to journal. When you sit down and write, you're getting all of your thoughts out of your head and onto the paper. This is actually my favorite way to become aware of what I'm thinking. Sometimes when I'm in a funky mood or I'm sad or I'm angry, just frustrated, and I'm not exactly sure why, sitting down to journal is the best thing I can do for myself. So I just sit down and I just start writing the first thing that comes to my mind. I might say, I'm feeling funky today. And then I just write the next sentence that comes to my mind. So if you've never journaled before, I just want to encourage you to just try it because it doesn't have to be perfect. What you write doesn't have to be pretty. Nobody's going to read it unless you really want them to. So the whole idea is just to get your thoughts out of your head and onto the paper. Some people call this a thought download. Some people call it a brain dump. You're just allowing yourself to see what's going on in your mind. So when you sit down to journal, just write anything and everything that comes to mind. Don't censor yourself. Don't try to make it sound amazing. You're not trying to win any kind of writing prizes here. You're just trying to understand your brain better. So if you need a prompt or something, you can start with a really simple sentence. For example, if you know that you're upset about your ex, then you might write something at the top of the paper like, my ex is, and then just fill in the blank with all the thoughts you're having about your ex. Or, this sucks because, and then just write everything that you feel like is awful in your life at the moment. So you can give yourself those small prompts. And I really like to give my clients prompts sometimes, especially if I see them struggling with a specific thing. It's a nice way to start journaling, but you definitely don't have to have one. Just free writing, getting it all out, I think is an amazing way to see what is happening inside your head. Now, the second way that you can get your thoughts out of your head is by talking them out. You can talk to a trusted friend or family member, a therapist, a life coach, anyone that you feel like you can trust in order to share your emotions and your difficult thoughts that you're having. So I don't know if you guys have ever had that experience, but sometimes we hold things in, we push things down, things are just brewing inside of us. And once we decide to let it out, once we decide to tell someone else all the thoughts that are running through our brains, it just feels better. It's just this cleansing feeling of like, ah, it's a release. I've gotten it out. And so that in and of itself is helpful. I have so many clients that tell me that. Like, it just feels so good to have someone really listen to what I'm saying and not judge me for it. But in this situation, the point of getting your thoughts out is so that you can get more clarity, so you can understand exactly what it is you're thinking. And when you can say it out loud, that's a great way to see. Now, if you don't have anyone in your life that you feel like you can trust or that you can talk to about specific things, another thing you can do is talk to yourself. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but I have a voice recording app on my phone. And sometimes when I'm driving, if I'm trying to work through something in my own head, I'll just start talking out loud and record it. And then when I go back and listen to it again, it helps me see very clearly the thought processes I'm having, the thought patterns I'm having, the thoughts that I'm thinking that are causing me some kind of negative emotion that I really don't want to be feeling and don't have to be feeling. And so if you've never tried that, I really recommend it. I think the car is an amazing place to do it, especially if you have any kind of commute. Just start talking and recording yourself in an app. And then when you go back and listen, it's almost like listening to a friend. Like, how would you approach your own problem if you were listening to a friend share the exact same thing? We all have so much wisdom. And have you ever noticed it's really much easier to see and to diagnose and to give advice for other people than it is for ourselves? So sometimes I like to sort of play that little game with myself. Imagine that I'm listening to someone else tell me their problems, and then it's much easier for me to know what to do for myself. The third way to become aware of what you're thinking is just to notice it as it happens, to just be aware of what thoughts are running through your mind and catch yourself thinking it in the moment. This becomes much easier when you get used to paying attention to your thoughts. But in the very beginning, when you haven't really spent much time being aware of what you're thinking, then this is actually a little difficult. So if this is new to you and you haven't yet learned how to pay attention to what you're thinking, then I really highly recommend you either journal or talk it out loud to begin with. But once you've practiced for a while, then it becomes easier to catch what you're thinking in the moment. So that is the third way to be aware of what you're thinking. So those are just 3 easy ways that you can become more aware of what you're thinking. Like I said, that is the very first step in the process of managing your own mind. Now, I'm going to give you a little acronym today to help you remember these 4 steps. So the first one is awareness, the letter A, and I just explained how to go about that. The next step is evaluation. So once you see what it is you're actually thinking, the best way to approach managing your mind is to just pick one thought that stands out to you as the most problematic, as the most emotionally charged. If you journal, when you read back over that writing, usually a sentence or 2 will stand out to you as like, ooh, that hurts. When I read that kind of hurts, or that makes me angry, or that triggers me. You feel something rise up emotionally in your body. That's the thought you want to focus in on, because that thought is probably the culprit, the one creating the result in your life right now, or the feeling that you're having that you don't really want to be feeling. So after you have identified one thought to work on, then the next step is to evaluate that thought. Like I said in a previous episode, your thoughts create your feelings. So every thought you have creates a separate emotion. And what we want to do in this situation is we want to look at this thought and determine what feeling it's creating in us. When you say that thought out loud, when you think it in your mind, what emotion comes up for you? So once you identify that, it's great to write that down on a piece of paper. When you think about feeling that emotion, what actions does it lead to? How do you show up in your life when you're feeling that way? When you're feeling angry or sad or frustrated or annoyed, how are you showing up? All of our emotions lead to our actions. When you say or do something, it is coming from an emotion. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm not an emotional person. I'm very rational. I don't take action based on my emotion. Well, that's actually not true. You may not be aware that you're doing it. And a lot of our emotions, when we hear the word emotion, we tend to think of those really heightened, volatile or emotions that cause us to act out in a really big way. But you can have the emotion of contentment. You can have the emotion of feeling calm. You can feel grounded. You can feel confident. So we do take all of our actions from emotions, but a lot of those emotions produce an action that you like. The second step is to evaluate your thought, to decide, is this a helpful thought? Is this thought creating within me what I want it to be creating? Do I like the emotion that it is producing? Does this make me feel like the best version of myself? Is this the direction I want to be headed? When I'm feeling this, do I show up in a way that reflects who I really want to be? Am I happy with how I choose to act when I feel this emotion? So, asking yourself these questions can really help you decide whether you want to keep thinking that thought or not. And that is the beauty of this entire exercise, this entire idea of managing your mind is that you have so much more control over yourself and over your life than you probably realize you do. When I learned this, that's what was so amazing about it and just so motivating and so invigorating is I just felt this renewed sense of ownership over my life, of control. And I don't mean control in a bad way, but I think that when we control ourselves, that's always a good thing. When we are intentionally living our lives, when we're not just reacting and acting in ways that we don't actually want to be acting, then it's a really good thing to know that you have control over yourself. So, usually when you do this exercise, you've identified a thought that does not serve you, that is not helpful, that doesn't cause you to show up in a way that you like, or doesn't produce a certain result that you want. And so, most of the time, when we do the exercise in the way I'm describing, when you identify that thought, it's a problematic thought. It's a thought that you don't like. And so, you're most likely going to decide that you want to think something different instead. And that's where the third step comes in, which is the letter D, which is decide. Decide what to think instead. Now, I want to point out really quickly that so far our letters are AED: awareness, evaluate, and decide. AED is a small device that can shock your heart back into rhythm when someone is having a cardiac arrest episode. And so I thought that these letters would be helpful for you to remember this exercise because I think that this is an AED for your internal life, for your mind, for your emotions. So we're on the letter D, which is to decide what to think instead. Now, this is really important to choose a thought that is believable. That is the most important part of this aspect of the exercise. You cannot go from a thought like, I hate my body, to I love my body and it's amazing. Like, that's just not possible. We can't make those huge leaps in the way we think about things. So, you have to choose a thought that's maybe just one step further or one step in the right direction of where you want to go. I'm going to go through this whole thing in just a minute and give you a very concrete example so that you can understand and see an illustration of this. But for now, I just want to say that choosing a new thought, the most important thing, like I said, is to choose one that's believable and not too far fetched, one that also creates an emotion that you like or that drives you in the right direction. So when you're choosing a new thought, just ask yourself, do I really believe this? Or am I close to believing it? Like, is it a believable thought for me? And then also, how do I feel when I think this thought? And you want to feel something, like I said, that moves you in the direction you want to be going. It might be something like motivated or acceptance or grounded or empowered. So whatever thought you choose, make sure it's believable and that it produces a feeling that you want to be having. And then the last step in the process is to practice. This is a really vital step that I think a lot of people miss or just don't give enough time. We cannot change our thoughts overnight. You can't do this exercise one time and think to yourself, ooh, I see how this really negative thought is just causing lots of bad results for me, and I don't want to think that. So instead, I'm going to think this other one. Voila, at the end. But that's not really the way it works. You have to be intentional about changing your thought. You have to practice your new thought in place of your old one. And this requires you to be onto yourself, to be aware of what you're thinking, to be able to catch that thought when it happens, and then remind yourself, hey, we're not going to think that anymore. Instead, now we're thinking this new thought. And so that's a very simple way of explaining it. I could go on and on and on about this, but I'm sure we will continue to unravel this and continue to expand upon this whole idea of managing your mind. We're going to talk about this throughout all of these episodes because really and truly, this is the foundation of how I help my clients. It's the foundation of how I coach and manage my own mind, and it is an extremely powerful tool. Let's go through a really concrete example, and I'll show you what it means to manage your mind. Since most of you listening to this, I'm assuming, are divorced women, let's use an example that a lot of us can relate to. You're worried about your kids. You're thinking a lot about how they're doing. You're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you see them really struggling. Maybe you see them sad or angry, or maybe they said something to you that was really upsetting and caused you to feel bad about yourself and feel like a bad mom. So you decide to sit down and journal. You just start writing everything that comes to your mind about how you're feeling about your kids, their well-being, how they're affected by the divorce, how the choices you've made have affected them. And through journaling, you uncover the thought, I have messed up my kids for life. When you read that thought, then you feel so defeated or discouraged, or maybe self-hatred or self-loathing. Maybe you feel guilty because you think that it's your fault that they're not doing well. And so you decide to look at that one thought, I've messed up my kids for life. And you realize that it makes you feel guilty or ashamed. And when you are feeling guilty and ashamed, then you don't show up as the best version of yourself. You don't show up as the best mom for your kids. You hide. You lay in bed and cry. You don't set boundaries with your kids because you don't want to upset them or make anything worse. Maybe you over respond and you try really hard to be very, very involved with your kids. Or maybe you go the opposite and you give them maybe too much space because you think they're angry with you, that you think they're upset with you, and so you back away. And so when you notice what you're doing, when you show up from that emotion of guilt, you don't like the result. You realize that it's not causing the relationship to go in the way you want it to go. And so you decide that that thought is not helpful. It is not working for you. It is not causing your relationship with your kids to improve or to be better. And so you decide to come up with a new thought instead. Instead of thinking, I have messed up my kids for life, you might choose to think, my kids are struggling right now, which also feels really accurate, but it takes away blaming yourself. It takes away the pain and suffering of heaping on all the responsibility to yourself. The truth is, we are all complex humans. The truth is, kids go through a lot of different things with friends and school and their other parent. And when you sit back and really think about it, you know that what they're going through or how they're struggling is truly not all your fault. And so you choose to think the thought instead, my kids are really struggling right now. And when you think that thought, yes, maybe you feel sad, maybe you're worried, but maybe that sadness or worry motivate you to do something about it. Maybe when you feel sadness and worry for your kids, your next thought is, how can I help them? What can I do about this? Maybe that thought motivates you to take action or to take a step back and really look at what's going on and go into problem-solving mode. When you are judging yourself, you are in self-loathing mode, and that doesn't really allow you to move into the problem-solving and into the more rational part of your brain because you're really fixated on yourself and your own emotions. And so to change the thought from, I have messed up my kids for life, to, my kids are really struggling right now, that little shift allows you to move into a better space. It allows you to show up in a way that's more supportive, more kind, actually more even focused on your own kids. And so even though that's not a thought that's going to cause you to feel joyful and content and amazing, it's a thought that will drive you into action. And I want to point out here as well, because as I'm saying this out loud, I'm going with what works for me, how that thought might show up for me, how I might respond to that thought. For you, if you have the thought, my kids are really struggling right now, that might not be a helpful thought for you to think. That thought might produce so much anxiety for you that you're frozen in fear and you don't take action. And so it's really, really important to pick a thought that works for you. Pick a thought that causes you to feel a certain way that's helpful and causes you to show up in a way that moves you in the direction that you want to go. That's where you just want to evaluate and decide what thought works best for you. And in this example, there are going to be times, as we continue to live our lives, that thought's going to recur. It's going to come back up, especially if it's a thought that you've been thinking for a while, or if it's a really powerful thought. It's going to keep coming up. And so your goal in that last phase of this process to practice is every time you notice that you're having that thought, you just remind yourself, that is not helpful. I don't want to think that anymore. Instead, I'm thinking this new thought. And then you just practice saying the new thought to yourself. You practice taking out that old thought and replacing it with the new thought. And you do that as often as you need to. You can even write the new thought down on a note card, depending on what thought you're trying to change in yourself. Sometimes it really does help to write it on a note card and post it on your mirror or on your dash of your car or next to your computer, somewhere where you're going to see that as a reminder that this is the new thought I'm intentionally choosing to believe right now and to think. Just to recap this entire process, in order to manage your mind, you need to go through 4 steps. Number 1, awareness. Become aware of what you're thinking by journaling or talking. Number 2, evaluate the thought you're having. Really look and see what that thought is creating within you, what emotion it brings out, and what actions come from that emotion. Step number 3 is to decide whether to keep thinking that thought or choose a new thought. And if you choose to think a new thought, decide what that new thought is going to be. What thought moves you in the direction you want to go? What thought creates an emotion that's helpful and causes you to show up in a way that you're proud of? And then step number 4 is to practice. Catch yourself thinking that old thought, that unhelpful thought, and redirect your mind to the new thought. Just remind yourself that that old thought is not serving you, it's not helping, it's unnecessary, and now you're choosing to think a new thought. So just remember the little acronym AEDP. Now the P is for practice. But if you want to remember what I described as the AED unit to shock your heart back into place, think of this as your personal AED, a way to manage your own mind and create a life that is amazing. I really and truly believe that creating the life you love after divorce goes back to identifying and changing individual thoughts that you're having. This is an incredibly powerful exercise. I love helping my clients work through these situations and become aware of what they're thinking, evaluate those thoughts, and then change them. Managing your mind is the foundation of creating an amazing life after divorce. Your marriage ended, but your life is not over. Get the free roadmap to move on faster after divorce. Just head over to my website at angiewilsoncoaching.com and click Get the Free Roadmap.